He ended our engagement in the middle of a crowded restaurant. No warning. No private conversation. Just one sentence, spoken loudly enough for everyone to hear. I don't love you anymore. The wedding is off. His friends were already seated behind him. Someone had their phone out. They were waiting for me to break. But I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't raise my voice. I smiled, and thanked him for his honesty. That's when everything went wrong for him. Because what he didn't realize was this. That moment wasn't my humiliation. It was the beginning of his downfall. And the more I stayed calm, the more his entire plan started to unravel. The engagement is over. I don't love you anymore. Ethan said it clearly, loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. The lunch crowd at the upscale French bistro in downtown Seattle went unnaturally quiet. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused in the air. I felt dozens of eyes slowly turn toward our table by the glass wall, the table Ethan had specifically requested when we arrived. For a second, I didn't move. My hand was still holding my fork above a plate of salmon I suddenly had no appetite for. His words didn't echo. They didn't explode. They simply settled into the space between us, heavy and deliberate, like they were meant to stay. At the long table behind him sat his friends, co-workers, really, the same people he had insisted join us for what he'd called a relaxed weekend lunch. They were watching closely now. Waiting. My name is Claire. I was 28 years old. And in that exact moment, sitting across from the man I had built my life around for nearly 4 years, something inside me didn't shatter the way he expected. It clicked. I gently placed my fork down. Ethan was studying my face, searching for something: shock, panic, tears. I recognized the look then, even though I hadn't fully understood it before. It was anticipation. The same expression someone wears when they're waiting to see the damage after pushing something fragile off a table. "Thank you for telling me the truth," I said. My voice sounded calm. Almost too calm. His eyebrows lifted slightly. That wasn't the reaction he'd planned for. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for my left hand and slid the ring off my finger. The ring he had proposed with 18 months earlier, during his company's holiday gala, in front of executives, clients, and an audience of people holding up their phones. I tucked it into the pocket of my coat. "You know," I added, after a pause, "I think this deserves a celebration." One of the men behind him let out a short laugh. Another smirked. Ethan's mouth curved into a satisfied half-smile. That's when I understood something important. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't emotional. This was staged. "I mean it," I continued, turning slightly in my chair. "A close-call celebration. For getting out just in time." The laughter faded. They were confused now. I wasn't crying. I wasn't pleading. I wasn't raising my voice or making a scene. I took a slow sip of water instead. My hand steady. "Claire," Ethan said, his tone sharpening. "Did you actually hear what I just said?" "I heard you perfectly," I replied. "You don't love me anymore. The wedding is off. I already thanked you for being honest." His jaw tightened. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I reached into my bag, pulled out my wallet, and placed enough cash on the table to cover my meal, plus a generous tip for the server, who looked frozen in place, eyes darting between us. Standing up, I gathered my coat. "I have to say," I added, meeting Ethan's eyes, "you chose an interesting setting for this announcement. Saturday afternoon. A full restaurant. Your friends conveniently seated right behind you." His face darkened. "I thought you deserved the truth," he said. "And I got it," I replied. "More of it than you probably intended." I glanced toward his friends, Mark, Daniel, and Chris, who were suddenly avoiding eye contact. "Gentlemen," I said with a small nod. "Thank you for being here. This has been enlightening." As I walked toward the exit, I felt every gaze in the room following me. I expected humiliation. I expected my chest to tighten, my throat to burn. Instead, I felt clarity. 4 years. I had given Ethan 4 years of my life. And in a single, carefully orchestrated moment, he had shown me exactly who he was, not accidentally, not emotionally, but intentionally. Outside, the cool air hit my face. I inhaled deeply. My hands weren't shaking. My eyes were dry. I reached my car, sat behind the wheel, and closed the door. Only then did the weight of what had happened fully settle in. But it wasn't devastation that washed over me. It was recognition. I had just seen the real Ethan. And the man I saw was someone I no longer wanted to marry. My phone buzzed. "Lena, how was lunch?" I stared at the message for a moment before typing back. "Me, wedding's off. I'll explain later. I'm okay." After a second, I added. "Me, actually. I think I'm better than okay." Her reply came immediately. "Lena, I'm coming over tonight." I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. As I drove away, I glanced once more through the restaurant's glass windows. Ethan was still sitting there, his friends leaning in around him now. I knew what he was probably saying, that I was in shock, that I hadn't processed it yet, that the breakdown would come later. He had no idea. He had just unlocked a door I didn't even realize had been holding me in. The drive home felt longer than usual. Seattle traffic crawled along as rain began tapping softly against my windshield, blurring the city lights into streaks of white and red. Normally, I would have used the time to replay conversations, to second-guess myself, to wonder what I could have said or done differently. This time, my thoughts went somewhere else entirely. I kept seeing Ethan's face, not when he ended things, but the moment afterward, when he realized I wasn't breaking. That look stayed with me. When I pulled into the parking garage beneath my apartment building, I didn't get out right away. I sat there with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, listening to the faint echo of cars passing above me. This wasn't the end of a love story. It was an exit I hadn't known I needed. My phone vibrated again. A message from Ethan. "Ethan, that wasn't the reaction I expected. We should talk." I stared at the screen. For nearly 4 years, I had responded instantly to messages like this. I'd explained myself. Softened my tone. Made sure he felt comfortable, even when I didn't. This time, I didn't type anything back. Instead, I locked my phone and finally stepped out of the car. That night, Lena showed up at my apartment with 2 bottles of wine and the kind of expression that told me she was ready to go to war on my behalf. "Start from the beginning," she said, dropping her bag and kicking off her shoes. "And don't leave anything out." So I told her everything. The restaurant. The table by the window. The way Ethan's friends were already seated when we arrived. The way he'd spoken loudly, clearly, making sure everyone heard. As I talked, Lena's face changed, concern giving way to understanding, then something sharper. "I knew it," she said quietly. "Knew what?" I asked. "That something was off with him. Claire, I've watched you change over the last few years. You stopped arguing. You stopped dreaming out loud. You started asking permission for things you never used to question." Her words stung because they were true. I met Ethan when I was 24, fresh out of grad school and working as a junior project coordinator at a commercial events firm. He was 2 years older, already established as a business development manager at a biotech logistics company, confident, polished, magnetic in a way that made people lean in when he spoke. Our first date had been at a coffee bar near the pier. He'd listened so intently when I talked about wanting to eventually start my own consulting practice. He nodded at the right moments. Asked thoughtful questions. At the time, I thought he was genuinely interested. Looking back, I realized he was collecting information. Within a year, my life had begun to shrink around his preferences. He didn't like my college friends, said they were aimless, so I saw them less. He complained that my apartment was inconvenient for his commute, so I moved closer to his side of the city. He said my dream of running my own business was risky and unrealistic, that I should focus on climbing the corporate ladder first. So I put my plans on hold. I told myself this was what compromise looked like. That relationships were about meeting in the middle. But the middle kept moving. My mother had asked me a question the previous winter, quietly, while we were clearing dishes after dinner. "Claire," she'd said, "does Ethan make you happy?" I'd smiled automatically. Of course. We're engaged. But happiness wasn't the word I would have chosen if I'd been honest. Stable. Invested. Comfortable. Those fit better. The engagement itself should have been a warning. Ethan proposed at his company's annual leadership retreat, a rooftop event overlooking the city, packed with executives and colleagues. He knelt down as someone conveniently started recording, applause erupting around us. I said yes with 100 phones pointed in our direction. What else could I have said? That was when the pattern fully set in, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Ethan loved an audience. He loved moments that made him look impressive, decisive, admirable. The proposal hadn't really been about us. It had been about how it looked. Wedding planning only reinforced that. I wanted something small, intimate. He wanted a grand hotel venue with hundreds of guests, most of them people I'd never met. I wanted something personal. He wanted something that reflected his professional standing. Every time I hesitated, he framed it as practicality. "This isn't just about you," he'd say. "This is about our future." What he meant was his future. By the time I finished telling Lena all of this, the wine bottles were empty and the apartment was quiet. "The part that bothers me most," I said slowly, "is that he planned it. The restaurant. The witnesses. Even where we Saturday." Lena nodded. "He wanted to humiliate you. He wanted me to fall apart. And you didn't," she said, a small smile forming. Which probably terrified him. As if on cue, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Ethan. "Ethan, I think you're in shock. This isn't like you. Call me when you're ready to have a real conversation." Lena let out a dry laugh. Of course he thinks that. Men like him expect tears, bargaining, desperation. When they don't get it, they panic. I turned my phone face down on the table. What made them stop laughing, I said, thinking back to the restaurant, was that I didn't react the way they expected. "That's power," Lena said. "Whether he realizes it or not." The idea I'd thrown out at lunch, the celebration, suddenly felt less like a joke. "I think I'm actually going to do it," I said. "Do what?" "Celebrate. Not to mock him. But to reclaim the story before he rewrites it." Lena's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant." Because I knew exactly what Ethan would do next. He would tell his version. Paint himself as reasonable. Me as emotional, unstable, difficult. But if I framed this as an escape, as something good that happened to me, he wouldn't control the narrative anymore. That night, after Lena left, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, I wasn't planning my next move around someone else's expectations. And somewhere between exhaustion and clarity, I realized something that changed everything. Ethan didn't end my life that afternoon. He exposed the truth. The next few days were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, quiet in the way a room feels after something heavy has been removed. Ethan's messages kept coming. Sunday morning. "Ethan, ignoring me is immature. We need to talk." Sunday night. "Ethan, I didn't do this to hurt you. You're taking this the wrong way." Monday afternoon. "Ethan, people are asking questions. You should help me explain what happened." I read every message. I responded to none of them. For the first time in 4 years, my choices weren't being shaped around Ethan's comfort, his expectations, or his image. The silence felt unfamiliar. And strangely powerful. While he spiraled, I started doing something far more practical. I began untangling our shared life. The wedding had been scheduled for early May, just over 6 months away. Deposits were already paid for the venue, catering, photography, and floral arrangements. Almost all of it was under my name. At the time, Ethan had insisted it simplified the paperwork. Now, I understood why. I made the first call to the venue. The coordinator recognized my name immediately. "I'm so sorry," she said gently after I explained. "The deposit is non-refundable." "I understand," I replied. Then, after a pause, "Would it be possible to apply it as a credit for another event?" There was a moment of silence on the line. "Yes," she said slowly. "Actually, yes, we can do that." An idea began forming. The caterer was kind. The photographer offered a partial refund without me even asking. The florist, a woman named Marco who I'd worked with professionally before, laughed softly when I told her the wedding was off. "I won't say I'm surprised," she admitted. "Every time you came in, you looked like you were apologizing for existing." That comment stayed with me. By midweek, I had a plan. The celebration I'd joked about in the restaurant wasn't just happening, it was taking shape. But that wasn't the moment everything truly shifted. That came when I opened our shared planning folder. Ethan and I had kept everything organized in a cloud drive, guest lists, budgets, schedules. I hadn't looked at it since the breakup. Until now. As I scrolled through the documents, something caught my attention. A file I didn't recognize. Priority notifications. I clicked it. Inside was a list of about 40 names, Ethan's friends, colleagues, extended family members. Next to each name was a short note. Send wedding update immediately. My stomach tightened. I checked the file history. Ethan had created it 2 weeks before our lunch. 2 weeks before he ended things. My heart began to pound as I dug deeper. There was a draft email saved in the same folder. As some of you witnessed today, I made the difficult decision to end my engagement with Claire. While this wasn't easy, I realized I couldn't move forward with someone whose values and long-term goals didn't align with mine. I appreciate your support and discretion as I begin the next chapter of my life. I read it twice. The language was careful, polished, strategic. It painted him as thoughtful and decisive. It made me sound like the problem. Then I found the messages. Group chats with his friends. Timestamped from the morning of the lunch. Ethan, today's the day. Bistro at 12:30. I want you there. Mark, finally. About time. Chris, I'll grab a seat early. Daniel, should I record? My hand started shaking. Another message, this one sent the night before. Not to the group chat. To a woman named Lauren. Tomorrow I'm ending things with Claire. I know this hasn't been easy for you, but I'll finally be free. I can't wait to start fresh with you. I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to keep up. I didn't know a Lauren. But Ethan clearly did. This wasn't just a breakup. It was a coordinated plan. An audience. A narrative. A replacement already waiting. And footage he'd expected to show a woman breaking down in public. The only thing he hadn't planned for was my refusal to perform. My phone buzzed again. Ethan, I don't understand why you're acting like this. This silence isn't healthy. For the first time since the restaurant, I typed back. I'm not acting. I'm choosing not to participate in conversations that only serve you. His reply came instantly. Ethan, that's cold. I expected more from you. I locked my phone. Then I called Lena. When I told her what I'd found, she went completely quiet. He wanted proof, she finally said. Video proof that you were unstable. Emotional. Justifying his story. Yes, I said. And instead, all he got was me walking away. By Thursday evening, the picture was painfully clear. Ethan hadn't ended our engagement. He had attempted to publicly destroy my credibility, emotionally and socially, while securing his exit and protecting his image. But he'd underestimated one thing. He'd underestimated what happens when a woman stops playing the role she's been assigned. I closed my laptop, took a deep breath, and opened a new document. If he thought he was controlling the story, he was about to learn something important. The truth doesn't need performance. It only needs light. I didn't expose anything. Not online. Not publicly. Not immediately. That was the part Ethan never saw coming. Instead, I focused on something far more effective. I let him talk. While he was sending frantic messages and calling mutual friends, I stayed silent and kept working. The celebration was scheduled for 3 weeks after the breakup, at the same venue that had been booked for the wedding reception. I used the existing deposit, changed the theme, and kept the description deliberately vague. A gathering to celebrate a new beginning. No explanations. No accusations. No drama. Behind the scenes, though, I was preparing. I thought carefully about who to invite. My real friends. My family. Colleagues who had known me long before Ethan entered my life. And, intentionally, a few people from Ethan's circle. The same people he'd wanted as witnesses to my breakdown. Let them see me in real life. Let them compare the woman standing in front of them with the version he'd been quietly selling behind my back. Meanwhile, Ethan was unraveling. Sunday afternoon. Ethan, people are saying you're throwing a party. Is this some kind of joke? Monday night. Ethan, you're trying to embarrass me. You need to stop. Tuesday morning. Ethan, whatever you think you're doing, remember I have my own side of the story. I didn't respond. The more he talked, the more inconsistent his story became. That's when Lena called me with her voice tight and controlled. You need to hear this, she said. A coworker of mine is friends with Mark's girlfriend. My chest tightened. Apparently, Lena continued, Ethan's been telling people for months that you're emotionally unstable. That you're clingy. That he was afraid to end things privately because you might lose control. I closed my eyes. That's not true. I know, she said firmly. But that's the narrative he was building. The public breakup wasn't just cruelty, it was insurance. Insurance. He'd wanted witnesses. Footage. Reactions. Evidence to support a story he'd already been telling. And now? I asked quietly. Now he's panicking, Lena said. Because you didn't react the way he promised them you would. It all clicked into place. The recording. The audience. The pre-written messages. He hadn't just wanted out. He wanted to look justified. I thought back to the restaurant, to the moment I calmly thanked him and stood up. That single choice had cracked his entire plan. The celebration invitations went out midweek. The design was simple, an open door with warm light spilling through, and one line of text. Join me as I step into the next chapter of my life. No mention of Ethan. No reference to the engagement. The effect was immediate. Questions started circulating. Why would someone celebrate 3 weeks after being publicly dumped? Was she okay? Was something else going on? Ethan tried to get ahead of it. He called people. Warned them. Told them I was not handling things well. Ironically, the harder he pushed that narrative, the more curious everyone became. By Thursday evening, I received an unexpected call. It was Ethan's younger sister, Maya. We'd never been close, Ethan had always kept a polite distance between me and his family. I wanted to check on you, she said carefully. I've heard a lot of conflicting things. I chose my words slowly. I'm doing well, I said. Better than I was. There was a pause. I hope you know, she continued, I never believed what he said about you. My breath caught. What did he say? That you were difficult. Overly emotional. That he was scared of how you'd react if he ended things privately. I almost laughed. But I watched you for years, Maya added. You were never like that. You were accommodating to the point of disappearing. When we hung up, I sat very still. If his own sister was questioning the story, the foundation was already cracking. The night before the celebration, Ethan sent one last message. It was longer than the others. More desperate. Ethan, I've been hearing things about this event. People are talking. Whatever you're planning, think carefully. I have my own evidence and my own version. Don't make this ugly. I read it once. Then I deleted it. He was afraid. And fear makes people sloppy. The morning of the celebration, I stood alone in the venue before anyone arrived. The room looked nothing like the wedding I'd once planned. Gone were the neutral colors and rigid seating charts. In their place were warm lights, bold colors, music that actually felt like me. For the first time in years, nothing in that room had been chosen to impress someone else. I took a deep breath. Tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about visibility. And once the truth becomes visible, it doesn't need defending. The guests began arriving just after 7. At first, it was the people who had always known me, Lena. My college friends, co-workers from my early career, family members who hugged me a little tighter than usual. Then came the others. People I recognized from Ethan's world. Faces from the restaurant. People who had been invited to witness my humiliation, and were now quietly taking in the scene in front of them. The room filled with warmth, conversation, laughter. Not chaos. Not bitterness. Joy. And that alone was already undoing his story. By 8:30, the question started circulating. So, what really happened? I didn't volunteer anything. But when people asked, I answered calmly. Factually. Without emotion. He ended things publicly at a restaurant, I'd say. He invited friends to witness it. He had prepared messages in advance. If they asked more, I showed them what existed, nothing exaggerated, nothing editorialized. Just documents. Timestamps. Screenshots. Truth doesn't need volume. It spreads on its own. I could feel the shift happening in real time. Conversations lowered. Phones were passed discreetly between hands. Expressions changed, confusion turning into discomfort, discomfort into recognition. And then, just after 10, the energy in the room changed. I saw him before anyone else did. Ethan stood at the entrance, scanning the crowd with tight control barely masking fury. He was wearing the same tailored shirt he'd worn to our engagement dinner, a detail that felt either deliberate or desperate. People noticed. The music didn't stop, but the air thickened. He walked straight toward me. Claire, he said sharply. What do you think you're doing? I turned to face him fully. I'm hosting a private event, I said evenly. You're not invited. His jaw clenched. You're destroying me. You're telling people lies. Showing them fabricated things. I haven't shared anything that isn't true, I replied. And everything I've shown came from our shared files. His face drained of color. You went through my documents. Our documents, I corrected. The ones I've always had access to. Around us, people had stopped pretending not to listen. This is insane, he snapped. This is exactly what I warned people about. You're unstable. Vindictive. I lifted a hand. Ethan, I said calmly, look around. He did. He saw faces that weren't afraid of me. Faces that weren't shocked or alarmed. Faces that were watching him. You planned a public breakup, I continued. You had people recording. You prepared messages in advance. You were involved with someone else while still engaged to me. My voice never rose. All of that is documented, I said. And all of it is true. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. What you didn't plan for, I added, was me refusing to play the role you assigned me. The silence was complete. Then, without another word, Ethan turned and walked out. No scene. No speech. No defense. The party didn't end when he left. If anything, it breathed. People exhaled, as if they'd been holding something heavy without realizing it. Music resumed. Laughter returned. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. In the weeks that followed, I heard what happened from a distance. His carefully curated image unraveled. The woman he'd been seeing ended things when she learned the full story. Friends quietly pulled away. Questions followed him into rooms he could no longer control. I didn't watch closely. I didn't need to. My life had already moved forward. The consulting business I'd postponed for years finally took shape. Clients came. Confidence returned. Friendships rebuilt themselves without effort. A year later, standing in my own office, I thought back to that restaurant, to the moment he'd tried to break me in public. What he planned as my humiliation became my release. The truth didn't need revenge. It just needed space to exist. And once it did, everything changed.